You ever catch yourself looking at someone else's life and thinking, wow, they've really got it figured out?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Maybe it's, a friend who's just crushing it at work or someone who seems like they're always on vacation.
Or just that feeling, right, that maybe everyone else got some kind of head start that you missed out on.
Exactly. It's pretty universal, I think, noticing what other people have, what they're achieving.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're unpacking today. We've been digging into some really interesting ideas about why we do
The
this.
whole comparison thing.
Yeah. Why we compare ourselves and, what that comparison actually does inside our own heads.
Huh.
We've been looking at some source material on it.
Right. And our goal here isn't to say, hey, stop noticing what other people have, because let's be honest, that's probably impossible.
Mm-hmm. Not realistic.
Instead, we want to explore the ways we compare ourselves that, well, end up being really unproductive, sometimes even harmful.
Yeah, and see if there's maybe a more helpful way to think about it all. We've been going through this text, Chapter 9, Let Them Theory.pdf.
And it has some surprisingly direct things to say.
It really does. And it sort of kicks off with this statement that um, it might seem obvious at first glance,
Right.
but when you actually let it sink in, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, the source just gets straight to it. Life isn't fair.
Boom. There it is.
Now, we all kind of know that, right, on
Yeah.
some level, but when you actually start to think about the sheer number of ways life can feel uneven, it's kind of staggering.
Absolutely. And the text really hammers this home. It doesn't just say life's unfair. It lists out a whole bunch of specific examples.
Yeah, it
That's
does.
not just like who has the better job. It talks about the student drowning in debt, or maybe having a sibling who just naturally seems more attractive or popular.
Getting stuck with the worst shifts at work constantly.
Right, or, much heavier things like the tragedy of war or being born with a chronic illness. The list just keeps going.
It's a really long list. Things like having parents who can give you a huge financial boost,
Yeah, massive advantage.
or missing out on a promotion that feels totally unfair, getting a really scary health diagnosis,
Hmm.
just messy family dynamics compared to, those perfect pictures you see sometimes.
Even stuff like how fast your metabolism is.
Right. Or the circumstances you were born into, the environment you grew up in, the cost of living going up and up.
Or just feeling bad about how you look. Simple as that sometimes.
So the big insight here, I think, is just acknowledging it. Everyone's starting from a different place with different advantages, different challenges. If we try to pretend it's all even, we just set ourselves up for these really unhelpful comparisons.
Yeah, and the sheer volume of those examples in the text, it really underlines the point, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Unfairness isn't some abstract idea.
No.
It's woven into everything, in big ways and small ways. And the text uses a really good analogy for this.
Oh, yeah, the cards analogy. That every human being is dealt a different hand in life.
And you can't control the cards that someone else is holding.
Yeah.
That one.
That really stuck with me, too.
That's a great way to put it. And the crucial takeaway from that is all the mental energy we waste, right? Fixating on someone else's cards, wishing ours were different.
It completely pulls your focus.
Exactly. It stops you from actually playing your hand, the one you actually have.
Which brings us right into this really tricky area, the whole trap of comparison. Because, okay, it's one thing to notice someone else seems to have it easier, but it's a whole other thing to let that observation completely derail you.
And the source material is super clear about the potential fallout from that.
Yeah.
When we're constantly measuring ourselves against others, focusing on what they have,
Yeah.
it can breed these really toxic feelings, feeling like a failure, not good enough,
Yeah.
just inadequate.
It's like the text puts it really bluntly.
Yeah.
You become your biggest obstacle.
Right. All that energy you're using for comparing just becomes this huge wall. And the consequences are pretty serious. The text talks about feeling stuck, that deep sense of hopelessness.
Always feeling like you're behind everyone else.
Yeah, perpetually behind. It even uses the phrase self-torture.
Which sounds intense, but when you think about that constant mental churn of negative comparison.
It doesn't seem so far off, does it? And it fuels procrastination, makes that inner critic louder. This is a really nasty cycle.
It is. And there's that really discouraging part about the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, right. Explain that bit.
Well, it's like by constantly comparing and feeling like you don't measure up, you actually sap your own motivation. And then because you lack motivation, you don't make progress, which just reinforces those original feelings of inadequacy. It feeds itself.
Precisely. And the text, again, it doesn't pull any punches. It says straight up, you are the problem.
Which might sound a bit harsh.
It does, a little.
Okay.
But the point underneath, I think, is about recognizing where you actually have some control, some agency.
Right. Realizing that this pattern of comparison is the obstacle, that's the first step to getting past it.
And it all comes back to that first fundamental point. Life isn't fair. You just got to accept it.
And a huge part of that unfairness, as the text really points out, is that we have zero control over so much of what makes up other people's lives, their success, their luck, even just the timing of things.
That's so true. We can't decide when someone else gets that breakthrough or what opportunities just happen to fall on their lap.
Or even, like, the talents they were just born with.
Exactly. The only thing we genuinely have influence over is how we react to all that external stuff and, the actions we decide to take ourselves.
It's that classic thing, isn't it? You see someone else with something you really wish you had. Maybe it's how charming they are, or their amazing vacation photos. Maybe they're taller, or have great skin, or the dream job.
Proposal. More money in the bank.
Yeah. And you just wish it was you. But the source material is pretty firm here.
Yeah, it basically says wishing is kind of pointless.
Yeah.
It doesn't magically make those things appear in your life.
In fact, it can do the opposite.
Right. It can actually chip away at your own confidence, making you feel even further away from what you want.
Okay, so we've established life isn't always a level playing field.
Definitely not.
And getting caught up and constantly comparing ourselves can really, really drag us down.
For sure.
But the text does offer some hope here, right? It doesn't just leave us there. It talks about different kinds of comparison.
It does. And this is a really, really crucial distinction it makes. It frames comparison as either a kind of torture
Okay.
or as a teacher. So it's not the comparing itself that's automatically bad. It's what we do with it. That's what matters.
Okay, interesting. Let's dig into that torture comparison first then. What does the text mean by that? How does it define it?
So torture comparison, according to the source, is what happens when we get fixated, like obsessed, or just really start beating ourselves up about aspects of other people's lives that are fundamentally unchangeable.
Unchangeable. Like what?
The text calls them fixed attributes.
Okay. Can you give us some examples from the text? What counts as a fixed attribute?
Yeah, it gives a pretty long list, actually. Things like someone's natural beauty, their inherent body type, their build,
Right.
their family history, how tall they are, how their metabolism works, we mentioned that one,
Yeah.
where their parents are, where they grew up, past experiences they've had, and also those like inborn talents.
What kind of talents?
Things like being naturally athletic or having perfect musical pitch or being exceptionally smart, like a genius.
Yeah.
Or maybe just picking up languages really easily, having a photographic memory, or just natural artistic talent.
Okay, so a lot of things people are basically born with.
Exactly. Or things that are just deeply ingrained parts of their history or biology. Not necessarily things they actively earned or worked super hard for in the way we might think. They were, like the text says, dealt these cards.
Right. And the crucial point is, no matter how much we might envy those things in someone else, and no matter how hard we might wish or even try, we can't just magically get them for ourselves.
Nope. And the text even gives us a little trick, a quick way to spot these kinds of attributes.
Yeah, the 30-second rule. Remind us how that works.
Okay, so the question you ask yourself is there anything I can realistically do in the next 30 seconds to change this specific thing about the other person that I'm focusing on?
Right.
And if the answer is a clear, definite no, then it's almost certainly a fixed attribute.
And the source is pretty blunt about how valuable, or rather, how not valuable this kind of comparison is.
Absolutely. It calls it useless for your growth and detrimental to your happiness. Pretty clear.
Yeah. The core message seems to be, anytime you spend obsessing over a fixed aspect of someone else's life versus your own is an act of self-torture.
Oof. Yeah.
And the answer, which sounds simple but is probably really hard, is just allow it. Let them.
That idea of let them, in this specific context, it really resonates. It's about acknowledging, okay, that's their reality, and realizing our energy is so much better spent on our own reality, on what we can actually influence.
And the text shares that really relatable personal story to make this clear, right? About Sawyer and her sister Kendall.
Yes. That anecdote makes it so much more concrete. The author talks about her own daughters. Sawyer, the older one, was constantly comparing herself to her younger sister, Kendall.
And what were the differences?
Well, Kendall apparently just naturally had a different body type, different bone structure, a faster metabolism. Plus, she was apparently really gifted athletically and musically, even had perfect pitch. Just born that way.
Wow. And as a parent, the author felt kind of helpless, right?
Totally. Because there was literally nothing she could do to change these fundamental inherent differences between her kids.
And the impact on Sawyer.
Over the years, the author saw Sawyer making herself miserable, constantly comparing herself to Kendall in these areas she couldn't change. She developed a really negative self-image, got fixated on her metabolism, always talking about how unfair it was that Kendall could wear certain things.
Gosh, you can just imagine how often that kind of thing plays out between siblings, friends, everyone.
It's a perfect illustration of what the text calls upward comparison, isn't it? Always looking at people you see as being somehow better off.
And the text mentions there's research on this too.
Yeah, it touches on how research shows that upward comparison often really damages our self-esteem. It just reinforces those feelings of not being good enough.
Does it mention the opposite, like looking down?
It briefly mentions downward comparison, looking at people who have it tougher. But it points out we don't tend to do that nearly as much.
Right.
And even when we do, while it might give a quick flash of perspective, it doesn't really fix the root problem of obsessing over those upward comparisons, especially the ones about fixed things.
Okay, so the main point is just how damaging that upward comparison is when it's focused on stuff that can't be changed.
Exactly. And the text emphasizes that the consequences of getting stuck in this torture comparison loop can be really serious.
Like what? What does it mention?
It links this kind of obsessive comparing to things like eating disorders, mental health struggles, problems with addiction, and just deep feelings of shame.
Wow, heavy stuff.
Yeah. And it suggests that this constant need to compare and obsess often comes from a desire for control. But ironically,
Focusing on things you absolutely can't control just makes you feel more powerless.
exactly, it completely backfires.
So the message seems pretty straightforward when it comes to this first type, the torture comparison.
Yeah. It's basically stop. Just find a way to stop.
Reclaim that energy.
Reclaim your personal power that you're currently pouring into these useless comparisons and redirect it. Put that focus back onto your own life, onto the things you can actually influence and change.
Yeah. As the text puts it so well, it is impossible to enjoy your life or love yourself and beat yourself up at the same time. You just can't do both.
So true. So the big takeaway from this part of our deep dive is really about learning to recognize it, right? Recognizing when you're falling into that torture comparison trap.
Yeah, obsessing over those fixed attributes in other people that, well, they're just not changeable for you.
Identifying those thought patterns, those loops, and then consciously choosing to, well, like the text says, let them have those things without letting it poison your own sense of self.
Exactly. And when you do that, you free up so much mental space, so much emotional energy.
Which I imagine leads us nicely into the second type of comparison the source mentions. The one that could actually be helpful, the teacher comparison. Sounds like we'll need to unpack that one next time.
We definitely will. But for today, maybe let's leave you with this really powerful thought from the source material. In life, you're not playing against anyone. You're playing with them. Someone will always have better cards than yours. It's not about the hand you've been dealt. It's how you play it.
That's a really grounding perspective.
Yeah.
So maybe as you go about your day, just notice, where might you be getting caught in that torture comparison? What fixed things about others are you focusing on?
And maybe just mull over this final thought. Hold on to your power because you're going to need it to unlock the potential of your own unique life.
Yeah.
What I found is that being happier requires you to allow yourself to be happier.